There are mornings you never forget. This one began with the sound of a delivery truck pulling away from my driveway. A small velvet blue box sat neatly on the welcome mat, the kind jewelers use for wedding rings. It was Father's Day. Before I continue, let me say this. If you've ever faced a moment where love and betrayal sat on your porch together, you'll understand my story. And if you're new here, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your thoughts matter more than you know. I bent down slowly, knees aching from years of factory shifts, and picked up the box. Light as air, but heavier than any gift I'd ever held. My wife, Carol, appeared behind me, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "Don't open it," she whispered. Her voice wasn't playful or surprised. It carried a tremor, the kind you hear when a mother calls her child away from the edge of traffic. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look closer," she said. "Can't you see?" I turned the box in my hand. That's when I noticed it, the faint smudge of soil along the bottom seam. Fresh, damp, clinging to the velvet like it had just been unearthed. A chill ran through me. For a long moment I just stared at it. In that tiny box, the years of my life seemed to gather, 43 years of overtime shifts, rain-soaked commutes, missed family dinners. The promises I had kept, the debts I had paid, the future I had built, all of it trembled in my hand. "Maybe it's from the kids," I said, trying to sound casual. Carol shook her head. "Emma and Luke can't afford overnight shipping, and your daughter, she wouldn't send this." She didn't need to finish. The silence between us filled in the words, "not after everything." I set the box on the coffee table. Its blue surface caught the morning light, glowing almost holy, like something meant for worship. But I didn't kneel. I didn't open it. I only stared, my mind tumbling backward to a winter night 15 years earlier. I had stood in the same living room, holding my wife's hand as she slid off her wedding band, the one she'd worn every day of our marriage, and pressed it into my palm. "When the time comes," she'd said, "bury this with me." And I had. I had lowered that band into the earth with her, beneath a sky so cold my breath looked like smoke. I had watched the soil fall, covering metal and memory alike. I had promised. So how could it be here now? My pulse hammered in my ears. Carol's eyes widened as she realized the same thing I did. This wasn't just a box, it was a message. "Call someone," she whispered. "But who do you call when the dead send mail?" I couldn't resist. My fingers moved on their own, lifting the lid. Inside lay the wedding ring, her ring, my late wife's. It gleamed as if polished, but the inner band was scratched and a tiny bit of dirt clung to the engraving. It was real. It was hers. My vision blurred. For a heartbeat, I thought I could hear her voice again, soft as lullabies. "Take care of them, Will. Promise me." Carol stepped back. "It's been dug up," she whispered. "Someone took it from her grave." The words hollowed the air. I slammed the box shut, breath ragged. My hands shook as if I'd been holding ice. "Who would do this?" I muttered. But I knew, deep down I knew. There had been the strange charges on my credit card last month, rental fees I never signed for. The hushed argument between my daughter and her husband that fell silent the second I entered the room. The way they avoided my eyes whenever inheritance was mentioned. "Will," Carol said softly. I looked at her. She didn't have to explain. We were both thinking the same name, my daughter. The front door creaked. I had left it open in my shock, and now the wind pressed it wider. Outside, the neighborhood looked unchanged. Neighbors trimming hedges, children pedaling bikes, but the ordinary had turned sinister. Somewhere close, someone had pried open a grave. Somewhere close, my own blood had crossed a line I never thought possible. I picked up the box, heavier now with memory and betrayal, and whispered to Carol, "If this is what I think it is, the war has already begun." Her hand found mine. It was cold, trembling, but steady. "Then we fight," she said. And in that instant, I realized the gift on my porch wasn't meant to honor me on Father's Day. It was meant to break me. But they had miscalculated, because this father wasn't done fighting. And so, with a velvet box and a stolen ring, my story truly begins. The velvet blue box still sat on the coffee table. Its glow had dimmed in the shifting light, but its weight lingered on my chest like a stone pressing deeper with every breath. I couldn't look at it any longer. So I did what I always did when life threatened to crush me. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a mug of black coffee, and let the bitterness steady my shaking hands. Carol stayed behind in the living room, staring at that box as though it might sprout legs and scuttle across the rug. Neither of us spoke. Some silences are too thick for words. As I sipped, I felt myself drifting backward through time, pulled against my will into the memories that built the man I had become. I was 21 the first time I clocked in for a graveyard shift, a warehouse filled with machinery that never slept, humming like some mechanical heart keeping the city alive. My foreman barked orders, the kind that rattled your bones more than your ears. Car, load the pallets, keep the belt moving, don't fall behind. And I didn't, not that night, not the thousands of nights that followed. I stacked boxes until my back ached. I learned to live on vending machine coffee and the stale smell of steel. I came home when the world was waking, kissed my wife good morning as she kissed me good night, and collapsed into bed while the sun flooded our tiny rented apartment. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it paid for groceries, for rent, for the stroller my daughter once sat in as I pushed her through the park on Sunday afternoons. 40 years. 40 years of bending my body like a machine just to keep theirs running smoothly. And in those years, I missed things. Birthday candles blown out while I was hauling freight. School plays I only heard about after the curtain had fallen. Family dinners where my chair sat empty but the bills on the table were paid. I used to tell myself it was worth it, that every drop of sweat was an investment in the kind of life my daughter deserved. And when she was little, I believed she knew. She'd draw me pictures, stick figures of us holding hands, smiling, her hair drawn too long, mine too short, but always side by side. She'd press them into my calloused hands and say, "For you, Daddy." Those papers yellowed with time. But I kept them, tucked in a box in my office, proof that once upon a time, love was enough. The memory collided with the present, a ring stolen from a grave, delivered like a ransom note on Father's Day. How had we gotten here? I set the mug down harder than I meant to, coffee sloshing over the rim. Carol looked up at the sound. "You're thinking of her," she said softly. I nodded. No need to ask who her meant. My wife who lay beneath the earth, the woman whose ring was now sitting inside that velvet box. She wanted peace, Carol whispered. That's why she asked to be buried with it, so she could rest with her promises intact. I pressed my palms against the counter, feeling the tremor in my arms. "And someone dug that promise up," I said. The thought gnawed at me. It wasn't just theft. It was desecration. Whoever had pried that ring loose had reached into the ground and clawed at my very life. I walked back into the living room, each step heavier than the last. I sat across from the box and studied it again, as though answers might appear if I stared long enough. Soil, scratches, a ring I'd once kissed goodbye. The clues weren't many, but they were enough. That's when my mind drifted again, uninvited, to a night 15 years ago. I'd been working back-to-back shifts. Money was tight. My daughter needed braces, and the insurance didn't cover much. I took every overtime slot I could grab, sometimes 16 hours straight. That winter night, I stumbled home at dawn, boots soaked, eyelids burning. The apartment was dark. Everyone was asleep. I collapsed into a chair, pulled off my gloves, and noticed the blisters, raw and angry, across my palms. For a moment, I wanted to quit, to throw it all away. But then I saw her backpack on the floor, a math workbook peeking out. She'd written her name in crayon on the cover, proud of her letters. And I remembered why I did it. I worked those hours so she could smile without shame, so she could stand tall with straight teeth and a future untwisted by the poverty that had bent me. I looked at my hands that night and whispered, "As long as they can still lift, I'll keep going." And I did. The memory faded. My hands now were older, spotted with age, stiff with arthritis, but they still remembered the weight of those promises. And that's why betrayal cut so deep, because I had never once stopped lifting for her. A knock at the door jolted me back. Not the sharp rap of a neighbor, but a hesitant tap, like someone testing if we were home. Carol flinched. I rose, heart thudding. Through the frosted glass I could make out a shadow, tall, shifting, waiting. When I opened the door, no one was there. Only the faint echo of footsteps fading down the sidewalk, and on the doormat lying where the velvet box had been was a folded piece of paper. I bent to pick it up. My name was scrawled across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. My daughter's. I unfolded it with shaking hands. The words were short, uneven, as though written in haste. "Dad, don't do anything stupid. We can fix this. Just don't call the police." My breath caught. Carol's voice was a whisper behind me, "So she knows." I clenched the paper in my fist, my daughter's handwriting, her plea. She hadn't denied what happened. She hadn't apologized. She had only asked me to stay silent. And in that silence I heard everything: the debts, the desperation, the choices that had led her to desecrate her own mother's grave. The coffee mug from earlier still sat on the counter. I picked it up and hurled it into the sink. It shattered, ceramic exploding like the illusion of family we'd been clinging to. "Not this time," I said. My voice was low, steady, almost foreign to my own ears. Carol touched my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" I stared at the note, then at the box. "I'm going to find out how far she's willing to go." And for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than exhaustion: resolve. The note crumpled in my palm like a guilty secret, its ink still fresh enough to smudge my fingers. "Don't call the police." That was all she had to say. Not "I'm sorry," not "this wasn't me." Just silence dressed up as a plea. I carried it into the kitchen and set it on the table beside the velvet blue box. The two objects sat there like accomplices in the same crime, one dug from the earth, the other from my daughter's hand. Carol hovered behind me, her face pale. "Will," she said softly, "we need to talk to her." I shook my head. "Not yet. Talking has never changed anything. I need proof. I need to see exactly how far this has gone." Proof, it turned out, was closer than I thought. Later that night, I sat in my office with the old desk lamp burning a cone of yellow light. My computer hummed as I logged into the bank portal I'd checked 1,000 times before. Only tonight, I wasn't looking for deposits or interest rates. I was hunting for fingerprints, financial ones. And they were everywhere. Charge after charge, small enough to hide but steady as dripping water. A jewelry appraisal shop downtown. A short-term rental for a safety deposit box. Late-night withdrawals at an ATM 2 neighborhoods away, each tagged with the card number of my so-called emergency user, my daughter. I scrolled, my chest tightening. For years, I told myself these were just mistakes, oversights, the confusion of online banking. But staring at the numbers now, I realized they formed a pattern as deliberate as footprints leading from a grave to my front porch. Carol entered quietly, a mug of tea in her hands. She glanced at the screen and winced. "How much?" "Enough," I said. "More than enough." Her silence was answer enough. The next morning, I didn't wait for her to call. I called them. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Dad." Samantha's voice was bright, practiced, the way she always sounded when she needed something. "I want you and Peter here," I said flatly. "Today." A pause, then "Why?" "You know why." Another pause, longer this time. Then the line went dead. By evening they arrived. Samantha in designer sunglasses too large for her face, Peter in sneakers cleaner than his conscience. They strolled into my living room as though it still belonged to them, as though the years of handouts and bailouts entitled them to my very walls. Carol stayed in the kitchen doorway, her dish towel twisted tight in her hands. I sat at the table, the velvet box in front of me, the note folded neatly beside it, and my laptop open to the bank statements. "Sit," I said. Peter smirked, sinking into the couch. Samantha perched beside him, arms crossed. "Dad," she began, "it's about this." I turned the laptop toward them. Lines of numbers glowed in the lamplight, each one an accusation. "Tell me, Samantha, what emergency required you to rent a deposit box, or to visit an appraisal shop with your mother's ring?" Her face drained of color. Peter leaned forward, his smirk hardening. "Come on, Will, you're making it sound criminal. We were just looking at options. You've got plenty, we've got none. What's a few thousand to you?" "A few thousand." My voice was quiet, but it carried. "Do you know how many thousands I spent on your gambling debts, Peter? on Samantha's shopping sprees, on rent cars, emergencies that never end. He opened his mouth, but I slammed the box shut with a crack that silenced the room. "This," I said, "was buried with your mother, and now it's sitting here because one of you couldn't stop reaching into my pocket long enough to let her rest." Samantha's lip trembled. "Dad, No," I cut in. "Not Dad, not this time." The air thickened, heavy with the weight of unspoken years. I thought of every overtime shift, every holiday missed, every ache in my spine that bought them one more month of comfort. And in return, they had given me this desecration and a note that begged me not to call the law. "You've treated me like a bank," I said slowly, "but I am not your ATM. I am your father, and you have repaid me with theft and lies." Peter snorted, leaning back. "You think you're some kind of hero? Old man, you're just sitting on money while your family drowns. That's selfish." The word cut deep, sharper than he knew. Selfish. After 40 years of sacrifice. After selling the car I loved, canceling vacations, skipping meals so Samantha could have ballet lessons. Carol stepped forward then, her voice trembling. "Enough, both of you. Can't you see what you've done? You've broken something you may never fix." But they weren't listening. Samantha's eyes glistened, her voice rising. "We're desperate, Dad. You don't understand what it's like, the pressure, the bills." I slammed my fist on the table. The sound cracked through the house like thunder. "The pressure," I roared. "Do you know what pressure is? Pressure is working double shifts so your daughter can go to college. Pressure is watching your wife die and still showing up to work because the mortgage won't pay itself. Pressure is burying a ring with her hand and swearing no one would ever take it away. That is pressure. And you dare stand here and call yourself desperate." The silence that followed was total. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to hold its breath. Samantha looked away first, her cheeks streaked with tears. Peter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I leaned back, exhausted but resolute. "It ends tonight. No more cards. No more accounts in your name. No more automatic transfers. If you want a life, you'll earn it, not dig it from graves and not bleed it from me." Peter muttered, "You'll regret this." I met his eyes, steady as stone. "No, Peter, for the first time in years, I won't." They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered curses. Their car screeched down the street, tires burning rubber into the night. Carol sank into the chair across from me, tears brimming in her eyes. "What happens now?" I looked at the box, the ring inside, the evidence of betrayal. "Now," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding, "I start taking back what I gave away too easily, my dignity." But even as I spoke, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. The house was too quiet after they left. The kind of silence that doesn't heal but throbs like a bruise. I sat at the table long after the roar of their engine faded, staring at the velvet blue box and the folded bank statements beside it. Carol moved about the kitchen, wiping counters that were already clean, rinsing mugs that were already spotless. It was her way of keeping from shaking apart. Finally, I rose and walked into the living room. That's when I saw it, the family photograph on the mantel. The one taken 20 years ago at the county fair when Samantha was still a girl was lying face down. At first I thought it had fallen during the shouting, but as I picked it up, brushing dust from the glass, I knew better. The frame wasn't broken. The stand on the back was still sturdy. Someone had turned it deliberately. In the picture, I was holding Samantha on my shoulders, her gap-toothed grin stretching from ear to ear. Carol stood beside us, her hair caught in the wind, laughing at something we couldn't remember later. It was a moment of joy frozen forever. Now the glass reflected only my tired face, lines etched deeper by betrayal. I set the frame upright again, but the sight of it twisted something inside me. Because that's what they had done, hadn't they? They had turned us upside down, erased joy with greed, toppled love with debt. I pressed the frame back against the mantel, harder than necessary, as though trying to nail the past into place. Carol appeared in the doorway, her eyes followed mine. "They turned it," she whispered. I nodded, a small gesture but loud. She stepped closer, laying a trembling hand on my arm. "Will, we can't let this destroy us." "It already has," I said. My voice cracked in the middle. The days that followed blurred into uneasy routines. I still brewed my morning coffee, still read the paper on the porch, still nodded at neighbors trimming hedges. But everything felt altered, fragile, like a glass balanced too close to the edge. Every ring of the phone set my teeth on edge. Every envelope in the mailbox made my pulse quicken. And each night when I passed the mantel, I checked the photograph. Upright, watching me. A silent reminder of what I once had and what I might already have lost. On the third night they came back. I heard the car before I saw it, tires crunching gravel, headlights sweeping across the window. Carol froze mid-step, clutching the dish towel like a flag of surrender. I opened the door before they could knock. Samantha stood on the porch, her face blotched from tears or drink, I couldn't tell. Peter loomed behind her, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. "Dad," she began, voice shaking. "Please, can we just talk?" I stepped aside. "Talking hasn't done us much good lately, but go ahead." They entered. The air between us crackled with tension. Peter scanned the room, eyes landing on the mantel. He smirked when he saw the photo upright again. "So you fixed it," he said. My jaw tightened. "I didn't know memories came with hinges for you to bend." He shrugged. "Things fall over." "No," I said. "You knocked it over just like you've been knocking down everything else." Samantha's voice wavered. "Dad, stop, please. We're trying to figure things out. The debts, they've piled up. Peter thought maybe we could, work something out with the ring. Just until." "Until what?" I snapped. "Until you drain me dry, until there's nothing left to bury me with." Her tears spilled then. "We didn't mean." "You didn't mean?" My voice rose. "You dug into your mother's grave, Samantha. You pried open a coffin of promises and pulled out the one thing I swore would rest with her forever. Don't tell me you didn't mean." The words struck her like blows. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing into her hands. But Peter only leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirk deepening. "Drama," he muttered, "all this over a piece of metal." The fury that rose in me was hot and sudden. I stepped toward him, fists trembling. That piece of metal carried 30 years of marriage. It carried every night I held her hand through sickness, every vow I never broke. "You will not stand in my house and call it nothing." For the first time, his smirk faltered. The room pulsed with silence. Only Samantha's sobs filled it, jagged and raw. Carol spoke then, voice barely above a whisper. "You've crossed a line, both of you. If you want any hope of forgiveness, it begins with honesty. Right now, tonight." Samantha lifted her head, eyes red. "Dad, it was Peter's idea, but I didn't stop him. I let it happen. I thought you'd forgive me like you always do." Her confession hit harder than a scream, because she was right. I had always forgiven, always written the check, always turned my anger into silence. But tonight, looking at the photo on the mantel, the past staring back at me, I felt something different, resolve. "No more," I said. Samantha's face crumpled. "Dad, please." "No," I repeated, sharper. "No more." Peter pushed off the wall, stepping forward. His eyes glittered with challenge. "Careful, old man. Family doesn't abandon family." I stared him down, my voice low but firm. "Family doesn't desecrate graves. Family doesn't hold out empty hands and call them love. Whatever you are, it isn't family anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy as stones. When they left, slamming the door behind them, I turned once more to the mantel. The photograph stood straight, glass gleaming. But now, no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't see the smiles. All I saw was the shadow of hands that had turned it face down. And I knew deep in my chest that the next time it fell, it wouldn't be an accident, it would be war. The night after their second visit, I couldn't sleep. The house lay in stillness, but my mind roared like a storm. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind felt like an intruder slipping through unseen cracks. Carol slept fitfully beside me, her hand clutching the edge of the sheet like a lifeline. I lay staring at the ceiling until the darkness itself seemed to breathe. Finally, I rose, pulled on my robe, and wandered down the hall. In the living room, the mantel photograph still stood upright, but I could not shake the memory of it face down, its glass like a blind eye staring at the floor. I poured a glass of water, hoping the simple act might calm me. That's when I heard it, a sound from the porch, a faint shuffle like shoes brushing against wood. I froze. The clock read 2:17 a. No neighbor came calling at that hour. I crept to the window, careful not to let the floor groan beneath me. The porch light cast only a weak halo, and in that glow I saw nothing. No figure, no shadow, just emptiness. But the sound returned, a soft scrape against the door itself. Carol stirred from the bedroom. "Will," her voice trembled. "Stay there," I whispered. I reached for the bat I kept near the umbrella stand. The scrape came again, sharper this time, then silence. Slowly I opened the door. Nothing. Only the porch, the night, and the echo of footsteps fading into the dark. But when I looked down, I saw it. A thin white envelope lying on the mat just where the velvet box had been days before. I bent, picked it up. No stamp, no address, just my name scrawled again in that hurried hand. Carol joined me, her robe pulled tight. "Another note," I shook my head. "Not this time." I slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside was not paper but a small flash drive, black, unmarked. We sat at the kitchen table, the glow of the laptop casting long shadows. My heart pounded as I inserted the drive. The screen flickered, then filled with a grainy video file. The angle was odd, tilted slightly. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing, the view from my own front porch camera. "Someone pulled this from our system," I whispered. The footage rolled. There was the porch as we knew it, railing, mat, potted plants. The timestamp read Father's Day, 3:04 a.m. And then movement. A figure stepped into frame, hood pulled low, moving with the caution of someone who knew they didn't belong. The shape of the shoulders, the stride, it wasn't Samantha. It wasn't Peter either. He bent, set the velvet blue box on the mat, adjusted it with almost ceremonial care. Then he turned slightly. The porch light caught his wrist as he straightened. Carol gasped. "Will, look." On the exposed skin just above the glove was a tattoo, a jagged black line curling into the shape of a snake. My blood ran cold. I knew that mark. I'd seen it at a barbecue last summer, half hidden under a sleeve. It belonged to Peter's cousin, a drifter who floated from odd job to odd job, always circling trouble like a vulture. "Not her," Carol whispered. "Not Samantha." "Not directly," I said, my jaw tight, "but close enough." The video ended, the screen went dark. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then Carol whispered the thought hanging heavy between us. "They used him." I closed the laptop. "No," I said. "He used them. And they let him." The next day I printed the bank records, the video stills, everything I had. I spread them across the table like evidence in a trial. When Samantha and Peter arrived, summoned by nothing more than my silence, they found me waiting. I didn't rise when they entered. I only pointed to the chair. Peter eyed the papers, the laptop. His smirk faltered. "What is this?" "Proof," I said. Samantha's voice cracked. "Dad, please." "Don't," I said sharply. "You asked me not to call the police. You begged me to stay quiet, and I almost did, but then this arrived." I tapped the flash drive. "Your cousin, Peter, the tattoo gave him away. He placed the box. He touched her grave." The color drained from Peter's face, though his words came fast. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough." Samantha looked between us, tears brimming. "Dad, it wasn't me. I didn't want this. I didn't stop it." I studied her, searching for the child I once carried on my shoulders. All I saw was a woman bent under the weight of choices she'd made, or allowed to be made. "I could forgive a mistake," I said quietly. "But silence is permission." Peter slammed a hand on the table. "You're blowing this out of proportion, so what if he helped us out? You've got money rotting in accounts while we can't pay bills." Carol flinched. "Helped you out," she echoed. "By desecrating his mother's grave." The room shuddered with the weight of her words. Peter's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "The only thing I regret is letting it go this far." When they stormed out again, I returned to the mantel. The photograph still stood upright, but I could feel its balance tilting. Because now the truth was out in the open. It wasn't just greed. It was collusion. They had brought outsiders into the circle of our grief, into the sacred ground of memory. And once outsiders were involved, I knew this wouldn't end at my doorstep. The war I had whispered about to Carol was no longer a possibility. It had already begun. The morning after confronting Samantha and Peter, I drove to the cemetery. The sun was only beginning to rise, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and gold. The ring weighed heavy in my pocket, as though it remembered where it belonged. Carol had wanted to come, but I told her no. This was a pilgrimage I needed to make alone. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the narrow lane. The headstones stretched out before me, rows of silence carved in stone. I parked, stepped out, and let the cold air slap me awake. The scent of wet grass mixed with the faint sweetness of honeysuckle carried on the breeze. I walked slowly, each step echoing in my chest, and then I saw it, her grave. The soil around the headstone was disturbed, the grass clawed back in uneven patches. A dark scar cut through the earth where something or someone had pried it open. My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the stone to steady myself, my breath coming ragged. They hadn't just stolen a ring, they had violated a promise. The caretaker approached, his cap pulled low, boots muddy from morning rounds. He paused when he saw me. "Mr. Carr," I nodded, unable to find my voice. He glanced at the disturbed ground and sighed. "We noticed it yesterday, called it in. Sheriff took a report, said it looked like someone had tampered during the night." Tampered. My voice was hoarse. "Call it what it is, desecrated." The man looked at me with something like pity. "I'm sorry, sir. In all my years here, I've never seen something like this." Neither had I. I knelt beside the grave, pressing my palm to the soil as though I could comfort her somehow. "I promised," I whispered. "I promised it would stay with you." But my promise had been broken by the hands of my own daughter's circle. The caretaker lingered a moment, then cleared his throat. "If you'd like, I can file for additional security. Cameras, patrols." I shook my head. "It won't matter. Cameras only catch the crime, they don't prevent it." He hesitated, then touched the brim of his cap and walked on, leaving me in the hush of the morning. I pulled the velvet box from my pocket, opened it, and stared at the ring. It gleamed in the weak sunlight, cruel in its beauty. For years it had been a symbol of love, of endurance, of vows kept through storms. Now it was evidence, proof of how greed corrodes even the sacred. I pressed it to my forehead, eyes closed. And in that darkness, memories came. Her laughter in the kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks as she baked pies. The way she'd reach for my hand under the table during family dinners, a silent reassurance that we were in it together. The nights she'd sit beside me after long shifts, listening as though my exhaustion was a story worth hearing. The ring had carried all of that, and now it carried betrayal. I stood, brushed dirt from my knees, and slipped the ring back into the box. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even just about Samantha's weakness or Peter's arrogance. It was about something deeper, a sickness in the marrow of our family, a rot I had ignored for too long. They thought they could reach into the ground and pull out my history, my vows, my dignity, and twist it into currency. But they were wrong. I left the cemetery with fire in my veins. Back home, Carol was waiting on the porch. She rose when she saw me, her face etched with worry. "Well?" she asked. I held up the box. "It's true, the grave's been disturbed. The sheriff knows, the caretaker confirmed it." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears welled in her eyes. "Will, I can't bear this." I pulled her close, the box pressed between us like a thorn. "Neither can I, that's why it ends." She looked up at me. "What do you mean?" I stepped back, my voice firm. "I've forgiven and forgiven, but forgiveness has turned into permission. They've mistaken my love for weakness. It's time I remind them that even love has boundaries." Her eyes searched mine. "How?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked inside, set the box on the table, and opened the drawer where I kept the old leather portfolio, bank records, insurance documents, my will. I laid them out one by one, each a piece of the puzzle they had been trying to solve with their own hands. Carol's breath caught. "Will, you can't mean." "I do," I said. That night I sat in my office long after Carol had gone to bed. The glow of the desk lamp pooled over the papers. The ring sat beside them, glinting coldly. I pulled out a pen, uncapped it, and began making notes. Changes, resolutions, boundaries etched in ink instead of sand. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming something I had lost: authority, dignity, peace. I thought of Samantha's face, the tears that had once moved me to open my wallet. This time, they would not. I thought of Peter's smirk, the contempt in his voice. This time it would be met not with silence but with consequence. And I thought of the photograph on the mantel, of the way it had been turned face down. This time it would not fall again, not without me standing firm. At midnight I set the pen down, gathered the papers into a neat stack and closed the portfolio. The war had begun at the gravesite, but it would end with ink, with law, with the kind of finality even greed couldn't claw open. I turned off the lamp, leaving the office in shadow. The ring glowed faintly in the moonlight, a reminder of what had been stolen and what would be reclaimed. Tomorrow I would take the first official step, but tonight I let the silence settle around me, not as a wound but as armor, because some promises once broken can never be restored, and others, once remade, become unbreakable. The next morning dawned gray, clouds smothering the sun as though even the sky had grown weary of looking down on us. I tucked the velvet blue box into my jacket pocket, slipped the leather portfolio under my arm, and kissed Carol's forehead. She looked up at me, eyes searching. "You're really doing this?" she whispered. I nodded. "I should have done it years ago." Her hand lingered on mine, trembling. "Will it stop them?" "No," I admitted, "but it will stop them from touching what matters most." She didn't argue, she just let go. Downtown, the law office sat on the third floor of a granite building older than I was. The walls inside were lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes, the kind of books that whispered permanence. Margaret Summers had been our lawyer for 15 years. She handled our mortgage, Carol's mother's estate, the paperwork for our retirement accounts. She knew us as careful people, cautious, predictable. When she saw me in her doorway, portfolio in hand and grief in my eyes, she set her glasses aside immediately. "William," she said gently, "come in." I sat across from her desk and laid the portfolio down like evidence in a trial. The box, too. She glanced at both, then at me. "Tell me what's happened." So I did. I told her about the box on my porch, the ring stolen from my wife's grave. I told her about the bank records, the hidden charges, the appraisal shop. I told her about Samantha's note, Peter's smirk, the photograph turned face down on my mantel. Her pen scratched furiously across a legal pad, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air vent. Finally, she leaned back. "William, this goes far beyond family squabbles. This is harassment. This is theft. And given the desecration, this borders on criminal." I nodded. "I don't want revenge, Margaret. I want protection for Carol, for myself, and for my grandchildren. They deserve better than to grow up thinking love is something you can extort." Her eyes softened. "Then we'll give you that protection." She outlined the steps like a surgeon preparing for delicate work. "First, the will," she said. "We can amend it immediately. The inheritance that would have gone to Samantha and Peter, we diverted into an educational trust fund, managed by an independent trustee, released only for Emma and Luke's schooling, their books, their tuition. Not a dime goes through their parents' hands." The words felt like balm on a burn. "Second," she continued, "we draft a formal letter removing Samantha as an authorized user on all your accounts. We freeze the cards, cut off access to your credit. That will stop the bleeding." I exhaled slowly. "And third," her eyes sharpened, "we discuss a restraining order. The threats, the trespassing, the theft, there's more than enough grounds. Once granted, any contact becomes a legal matter, not a family one." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like relief. We spent hours reviewing documents. I signed my name again and again, each signature carving a new boundary into stone. Margaret explained the trust fund in detail, how it would bypass Samantha and Peter, how an appointed trustee would pay schools directly. My grandchildren's future would be secure, even if their parents' lives remained tangled in debts and lies. When I placed my final signature on the amendment, I felt something release inside me, a weight I had carried for decades, the burden of always saying yes. 30 years, I murmured. 30 years of patching holes in their ship, and now I'm finally stepping onto dry land. Margaret smiled softly. It isn't cruelty, William, it's responsibility. You've given enough. This ensures your love reaches the right hearts. When I rose to leave, she handed me a folder of copies. I'll file everything by the end of the week. The trust will be established, the will updated, the accounts amended. I nodded, clutching the folder as though it were armor. And William, she added as I reached the door, I turned. You're doing the right thing. Her words lingered with me all the way to the car. At home, Carol waited on the porch. She saw the folder in my hands, the steadiness in my stride, and her eyes filled with tears. "It's done," I said. She took the folder, set it aside, and wrapped her arms around me. For a moment we stood in silence, holding each other like survivors after a storm. Then she whispered, "Do you think she'll find out?" "Of course," I said. "And when she does, she'll rage, but it won't matter. The law will stand where my weakness once fell." That night I placed the velvet box on the mantel beside the photograph. The glass reflected both, the joy of the past, the wound of the present. But for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. The ring wasn't just a symbol of what had been stolen. It was a reminder of vows that still bound me to honor, to protect, to love rightly. Carol joined me, her hand slipping into mine. Together we looked at the photograph upright, at the box beside it, at the fragile balance of memory and resolve. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "everything changes." I didn't know yet how Samantha and Peter would respond. But I knew this. The days of endless forgiveness, of checks written in silence, were over. The law was on my side now, and love, sharpened by boundaries, had finally found its spine. The folder from Margaret sat on my desk like a shield, neat stacks of paper that drew a line in the sand. For the first time in years, I slept without jolting awake to phantom phone calls or imagined knocks at the door. But peace never lasts long in a house where betrayal has taken root. 2 days later, Margaret called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the weight beneath it. "William, I've been reviewing past authorizations. There's something you need to see." I drove downtown again, my chest tightening with every turn of the wheel. In her office, she spread documents across the desk. Among them was a paper I vaguely remembered, a temporary medical power of attorney I'd signed last year when I went in for heart tests. At the time, Samantha had insisted. "Just in case, Dad," she'd said, tears shining in her eyes. "I need to be able to sign for you if something happens." I'd been tired, vulnerable. I'd signed. Margaret tapped the page with her pen. This authorization was supposed to expire after 90 days, but it was never formally rescinded, and someone used it. My throat tightened. Used it how? She slid another paper forward, a record from the county clerk's office. It showed my name but not my signature, granting temporary access to a safe deposit box. The witness, Peter. My pulse roared in my ears. "They used it," I whispered. "They used my health scare as a key." Margaret nodded grimly. "That's how they accessed the ring. They presented this document, claimed it was still valid, and gained entry. Legally questionable, morally indefensible." I gripped the arms of the chair. The betrayal cut deeper than before. It wasn't desperation, it was calculation. I left the office in a haze, documents clutched in my fist. The city moved around me, horns blaring, feet shuffling, voices shouting. But I felt like I was walking underwater. At a red light, I saw a man holding his daughter's hand as they crossed the street. She laughed, swinging her arm, trusting her father completely. For a moment my breath caught. That used to be us. That used to be Samantha and me. Now she had handed my trust to her husband like counterfeit currency. When I got home, Carol was waiting on the porch again, sensing the storm in my eyes before I even spoke. "What did you find?" she asked. I handed her the documents. She read slowly, her lips tightening with every line. By the time she finished, tears shimmered in her eyes. "They forged the future," she whispered. I nodded. "They turned my health into leverage, my weakness into their doorway." Her hands trembled as she pressed the papers back into mine. "Will, this isn't just family anymore, this is criminal." "I know," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, too steady. That night Samantha called. Her number flashed on the screen, and for a long moment I considered ignoring it. But silence had been my enemy for too long. I answered. "Dad." Her voice was soft, careful, like she was stepping into a room full of broken glass. I said nothing. I heard you changed the accounts, that you saw Margaret. Dad, we can talk about this. I finally spoke. Did you know about the paper? She hesitated too long. What paper? The one I signed when I was in the hospital. The one you slipped into Peter's hands. Her breath hitched. Dad, it wasn't like that. Then tell me how it was. Silence. Do you know what it feels like? I continued. To watch your daughter turn a hospital bed into an opportunity. To sign a paper with shaking hands, trusting her, only to learn she used it to dig up her mother's grave. Dad, please, her voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You didn't stop it, I said coldly. And silence is permission. Peter's voice cut in, faint but unmistakable in the background. Hang up. You don't owe him anything. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing like a wasp in my ear. Carol appeared in the doorway, her face pale. What did she say? Nothing, I answered. And in saying nothing, she said everything. Later that evening, I returned to my office. I opened the portfolio, slid the new documents inside, and placed the old authorization paper on top. I studied it for a long time. My own signature, shaky from fatigue. Her name listed as proxy. I had thought it an act of love. She had turned it into a weapon. My hand curled into a fist. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It wasn't about bills or debts. This was about control, about how far she and Peter were willing to bend morality until it snapped. But they hadn't counted on one thing, that the man who had carried steel on his back for 40 years still had enough strength left to carry this fight. I rose, walked to the mantel, and placed the paper beside the photograph in the velvet box. 3 artifacts: memory, betrayal, resolve. Carol joined me, slipping her hand into mine. What now? She asked. I stared at the photograph, at the child's smile trapped in time, and felt a cold clarity settle over me. Now, I said, we stop playing defense. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I turned to her, my voice steady. I mean it's time they learn what consequences feel like. The storm had shifted. I could feel it in my bones. Before, I had been reacting, patching leaks, cleaning messes, forgiving sins. But now I was building something stronger. The law was on my side. The evidence was in my hands. And the will of a father, once pliable, had hardened into steel. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between love and enablement. And they would learn it not from my wallet, but from the weight of justice. The night came heavy with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and slows your breath. Carol had gone to bed early, her sleep restless, her body curling into itself like she was bracing for impact. I stayed in my office, papers spread across the desk, Margaret's documents, the old authorization, the photographs, the bank statements. Each page was a weapon now, sharper than fists. At some point I must have dozed, because the next thing I heard was the unmistakable growl of an engine pulling into the driveway. I sat up straight. The clock read 10:47 p.m. Headlights cut through the blinds. Carol's voice called faintly from the bedroom. Will, stay inside, I said, rising. My voice was steadier than my pulse. The knock came hard and fast before I reached the door. Then the doorbell pressed twice in rapid succession. I stood with my hand on the brass handle, breathing slow. Then I opened it just enough to see, just enough to remind myself I wasn't afraid. The door was only half open, but it was enough. Samantha stood on the porch, eyes wild, her hair disheveled as though she'd been crying or screaming in the car. Behind her loomed Peter, his jaw set, his presence a wall of menace. Dad, she said, her voice shaking, we need to talk. We already talked, I replied. My tone was flat, measured. And I was clear. Peter sneered. Clear? You're insane. You think cutting us off solves anything. I tightened my grip on the doorframe. It solves everything. My money is no longer your crutch. My silence is no longer your permission. Samantha stepped forward, but I blocked her with the door, leaving only that narrow crack between us. Her voice cracked. You'll never see Emma and Luke again if you do this. The words struck, but not as they once had. I remembered the countless times she'd used the children as bargaining chips, weeks withheld for smaller arguments, visits cut short when money wasn't enough. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a terrible calm. That's not a threat anymore, Samantha. That's a blessing. Her mouth fell open. disbelief and rage colliding on her face. What? If keeping them away from me means they won't learn manipulation as love, then let them stay away. Better no grandfather at all than one who teaches them that extortion works. Peter's face darkened. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching into the doorway. You think you can talk to her like that? You think you can slam doors in our faces and we'll just walk away? My voice was steel. Yes. The silence crackled, broken only by the cicadas screaming in the night. Peter leaned in closer, so near I could smell the faint musk of sweat and cheap cologne. His voice dropped to a low growl. We know where you live, old man. We know your routines. You might want to reconsider before something happens. Carol gasped behind me. I hadn't realized she'd come to the hallway, but now her silhouette trembled in the dim light. Are you threatening me? I asked, my tone calm enough to unnerve even myself. Peter's smirk returned. I'm saying family ties go both ways. You cut us off, don't expect us to go quietly. I straightened. My hand pushed the door slightly wider, just enough for my words to carry with force. If you want to keep this as family business, you walk away now. If you want to make it criminal, I'll call the sheriff tonight. Every document, every charge, every recording already in my lawyer's hands. Samantha grabbed Peter's arm, panic flashing in her eyes. She whispered something urgent, but he shook her off. You think you're so clever, he spat. Hiding behind lawyers, behind papers. Money doesn't make you powerful, blood does. Blood, I echoed. My voice rose, finally sharp. Blood is what you sold when you pried open your mother's grave. Blood is what you trampled when you turned my illness into a signature. You talk about blood, you left that behind the moment you chose greed. The words landed. Samantha flinched. Even Peter faltered for a beat, though his anger soon covered it. He shoved a finger in my direction. This isn't over. You're right, I said evenly. It isn't, but for the first time it won't end the way you expect. The standoff stretched, taut as wire. Then with a snarl, Peter turned and stormed down the steps. Samantha lingered, her eyes wet, her lips trembling as though she wanted to say something, anything, but she didn't. She followed him into the night, their car engine screaming as it peeled out of the driveway. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking like a final judgment. Carol stepped to my side, her hand trembling in mine. Will, what if they come back? They will, I said. My voice was steady. But next time the door won't be half open. It'll be shut and locked, and the law will be waiting. We stood in silence, listening to the echo of the car fade, the cicadas filling the space left behind. On the mantel, the photograph stood upright, unshaken, but I knew its balance was fragile like everything else. The war had reached my doorstep, and though I had turned them away tonight, I felt the battle lines harden. This was no longer about money. It was about survival. The house felt hollow after they left, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the venom of Peter's threats and Samantha's silence. Carol sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea gone cold. I walked the length of the living room again and again, each step pulling me deeper into thought. I had closed the door on them, yes, but I knew better than to believe it was the end. Threats don't vanish. They ferment. It was nearly midnight when the sound came, a soft thud against the porch. Not the heavy slam of footsteps, not the roar of an engine, just a drop. Carol stiffened. Will, I raised a hand, stay here. I opened the front door cautiously, half expecting to see them back again, ready to unleash more venom, but the porch was empty. Only one thing sat on the welcome mat, a small padded envelope, unmarked. I bent slowly, picked it up. No return address, no handwriting, just a faint bulge inside, square and hard. I closed the door behind me and carried it to the table. Carol's eyes followed every move. What is it? She whispered. I tore the envelope open. Inside lay a flash drive. Plain, black, unremarkable, except for the faint red scratch across its surface as though someone had dragged a knife across the plastic. Another message. Another weapon. I slid the drive into my laptop. For a moment the screen remained black, then a single file appeared. Play me. MP4. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Carol reached out, stopping me. What if it's a virus or worse? I met her eyes. At this point we need to know. She withdrew her hand. I double-clicked. The video flickered to life. At first it was only static, then a blurry image sharpened. A man sat in what looked like a dingy basement. His face was hidden by shadow, but I recognized the tattoo on his wrist, the snake, Peter's cousin. He leaned forward, voice low and mocking. "You think cutting them off changes anything, old man? Money finds its way back. Blood finds its way back, and when it does, you'll remember this moment." He held something up to the camera. For a second my heart stopped. It was the ring, my wife's ring. But this time not in the velvet box. It dangled from a chain around his neck, swinging like a stolen trophy. He smirked, then the screen went black. Carol gasped. "But how? The ring's here, Will, on the mantle." I rushed to the mantle, yanked the box open. Empty. The ring was gone. I staggered back, my breath ragged. "But I put it here," I whispered. Carol covered her mouth. "They've been inside the house." Her words froze me more than the video had. The realization sank like ice into my bones. Not only had they desecrated her grave, they had invaded my home, slipped past locks and doors, stolen back the symbol of everything I had sworn to protect. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. The war was no longer at the doorstep. It had breached the walls. Carol's hand rested on my shoulder. "What do we do now?" I looked up, my eyes burning with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "What we should have done from the start," I said. "We fight, not with forgiveness, not with silence, with evidence, with the law, with everything they've turned against us." I pointed to the flash drive still glowing in the port. "This time they gave us their own confession." Carol nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I rose, closed the laptop, and locked the flash drive in my desk drawer. Then I returned to the mantel, where the photograph stood alone now, the empty box beside it. The photo still showed us smiling, me, Carol, and the little girl who once rode on my shoulders. But the empty box beside it told another story. Two truths side by side. And between them the future, uncertain and sharp as broken glass. That night I sat at the desk again. The document spread before me, the drawer locked with the drive inside. I thought of Margaret's words, of the trust fund for my grandchildren, of the restraining order still waiting to be signed by the court. I thought of Samantha's tears, Peter's threats, the cousin's smirk. And I realized this wasn't just a story about inheritance anymore. It was about whether dignity could survive betrayal, whether promises could outlast the people who broke them, and whether a father could still protect his family, not from poverty but from themselves. When the clock struck 2, I finally closed the portfolio and stood. Carol waited in the doorway, her eyes tired but steady. "Will," she asked. "Yes. Do you think it's really over?" I looked at the photograph, at the empty box, at the shadows stretching long across the floor. "No," I said quietly. "It's only just begun. And if you've stayed with me until the end of today's story, thank you. These stories only come alive when there's someone to listen. If you felt a connection, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. I'll be truly grateful to read them. And stay tuned to see what happens next, because this battle has only just begun."